So just before we start today's episode, I want to let you know that my guest and I do discuss financial abuse and coercive control. I've included some further information in the show notes if you do need some further support after listening to today's episode. Here it is. Welcome to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Kate Moore-Youssef and I'm a wellbeing and lifestyle coach, EFT practitioner, mum to 4 kids, and passionate about helping more women to understand and accept their amazing ADHD brains. After speaking to many women just like me and probably you, I know there is a need for more health and lifestyle support for women newly diagnosed with ADHD. In these conversations, you'll learn from insightful guests, hear new findings, and discover powerful perspectives and lifestyle tools to enable you to live your most fulfilled, calm, and purposeful life wherever you are on your ADHD journey. Here's today's episode. Today we have got Catherine Morgan. Now, let me introduce Catherine to you because this is an amazing bio. So Catherine is a multi-award-winning qualified financial advisor, certified financial coach, financial abuse specialist, inherited family trauma healer, and a financial therapist. And she specialises in helping women feel more deserving of holding money through somatic, therapeutic, and practical tools. And she is on a mission to reduce financial anxiety and increase financial empowerment and resilience for 1 million people around the world. And Catherine creates safe spaces, financial equality, independence, and justice for all women. Welcome to the podcast. Can't wait to just dive in and go there with you because this is such an important, conversation, especially for women with ADHD, neurodivergent women, which you are one of them. You were diagnosed last June. So welcome to the podcast, Catherine. I can't wait to just get started.
Thank you so much. It feels like such a pleasure to be here, not only as an expert on this podcast, but also as a listener. I remember last year, prior to my diagnosis in June 2023, I was so desperate to find podcasts that spoke to women specifically about ADHD. And I've literally listened to your podcast since last year. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much.
That's so nice to hear. And I'm delighted that it's, supported you. And it's just so interesting, the amount of people and their backgrounds and so much knowledge and expertise. And then the ADHD seems to be the missing link to bring lots of things together. Can I ask you, first of all, what led you to your diagnosis?
So actually, I began my journey because I was exploring how to support my son. So I've got 2 boys, G&T, not a refreshing drink. My eldest, George, he was later last year diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And I've known ever since he was born, really, that there was something very unique about him. And he was being my first son. I would always tell myself that I'm just being silly, I'm being oversensitive, being a highly sensitive person myself. And then as he grew up, I started to really understand that actually, no, I really believe that he is on the spectrum. And there was so much shame around spectrum diagnosis. And as I started to explore it, I read some fantastic books, I listened to some great podcasts, and I thought, actually, I can resonate with so many of the symptoms for myself.
Yeah.
And I started to explore, and as we do sometimes with ADHD, we go very hyper-focused. I went very hyper-focused on understanding everything about spectrum disorders, and I really started to change my language around how I perceived spectrum diagnoses and spoke to many people about it. And I then decided to actually go for a discussion with a local psychiatrist. And there began my journey. I went for a diagnosis. I had about 6 really high intense meetings. I found it really emotionally quite challenging to go through the process. But it was like this light bulb moment, the penny finally dropped, where I finally understood why so much of what I perceived to be trauma responses of how I dealt with things in my life, including money, which we'll talk about today, weren't because there was something wrong with me. It was because I had ADHD and severe ADHD. But there was a lot of shame for me around what would my parents say, what would my siblings say, what would my clients say.
Yeah.
And I would say, having been through that process now, looking back on it, it was one of the best decisions that I ever made.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that. And, we hear that a lot of, we get that diagnosis and actually it's then, oh, what about my family? How they kind of think I've got it all together, or, like very typically it's that sort of the swan, with the legs going crazy underwater. And now we've got to explain ourselves to our family. But, I've not heard one person who gets a diagnosis that then can't see it in another member of their family. And I guess it's their journey, whether or not they're ready to go and explore, whatever's going on for them. But essentially we have to kind of do our own work, and hopefully that kind of ripples out to the family around us if they're ready.
I think one of the biggest things for me of getting the diagnosis was actually understanding that, particularly for children who get an early diagnosis, is understanding that some of the situations that I was placed in as a young girl and in my teenage years and sort of into my 20s, I could have easily have avoided had I have known that having ADHD makes you more susceptible to experience trauma-related incidences. And when I understood that, I felt so deeply powerful that I had this knowledge that I could then share with my son, to say to him, you may find yourself wanting to jump off the pier that's just down the road on the beach, without even maybe thinking or considering about the tidal times. You might get in situations where you're more likely to want to do this. And I think that it was a total reframe of seeing it as a superpower, and rather than seeing it as something where we believe there's something wrong with us, or we believe that society calls it a disability, and it makes us feel unworthy of love and joy and success in our own lives. So I feel like for me that was a real light bulb moment.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. When you've got kids and you can hopefully get them diagnosed earlier on, so they can then feel more empowered and they can understand themselves. And like you say, those little nuances of the impulsivity or what goes on inside their brains when they, if they can't share it, all these little things that we can sort of say to them more compassionately instead of the shame and all the not knowing and thinking there's something wrong and flawed with us, is very powerful. And hopefully it just will keep growing in the awareness and the education. But I think when we're diagnosed alongside our children, it can be a very positive thing. I wanted to touch on now, obviously when I read out your biog and we talked about financial abuse, financial trauma. And for someone that's listening to this and they know the words financial, they know the word abuse and trauma, but they've never heard them together, can you explain a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, there's a really interesting link between financial abuse and financial trauma. Financial abuse is an area that's actually not well known. A lot of women will have heard or perhaps even experienced domestic abuse. But financial abuse is one of the biggest reasons that keeps women in domestic abuse environments and situations. So over 80% of women are trapped in those abusive relationships because of financial coercive control. And so in the financial abuse space of the work that I do in the world, it's really to identify what some of those red flags are, so that women can be in a position, first of all, to identify those potential red flags before that can happen. But also then we can support with how to heal from financial abuse. And for many women that I've supported, they may have experienced abuse or their mums may have experienced financial abuse in the past. And often it can be one of those things that gets carried through generationally because of the behaviors that are passed down through the generations. And I just really have a huge passion in making sure that all women have access to financial resources so that they are in a position of financial resilience and not potentially being in a situation where they are relying on their partners for access to finances, which can leave them, potentially in some pretty awful situations.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because from the outside, we may see an outwardly powerful, professional woman, ambitious, but actually, without going into too much detail, I've known women who have been kept, maybe coerced because of financial issues that their husband or partner either won't relinquish any control over the bank accounts or restricts money, and our freedom is then. And like you say, if we are stuck in an abusive relationship purely because we don't know if we can look after our children, we can afford to pay rent or mortgage or anything like that, I presume you see, so many different women from all walks of life. How do you help empower and unshackle women who are maybe free and powerful in so many different areas of their life, and this is the one thing that's holding them back?
I think it depends on, like, if they're in a situation where there is narcissistic control or coercive control going on, one of the most important things in that situation is to ask for help. And because often what happens in that kind of situation is that the other person who is in coercive control can try and manipulate that person and make them feel like they're not good enough. Like, you're not good enough to look after money, so I'm going to keep control of all of the finances. They can also become very isolated. So one of the signs I always talk about is if you know of a friend or a neighbor or someone who is essentially not being present in social environments, or perhaps they're becoming quite quiet, or they're not leaving their house, then that can often be a sign that the other partner is trying to coercively manipulate and keep them in a place of stuckness. And that makes it difficult then for women to reach out for help. So there's lots of support lines around financial abuse that women can reach out to, lots of refuges around the country that women can confidentially contact to get support. And I guess where I'm coming from is to help women to identify those flags before that situation happens, or to build up that financial resiliency muscle when those relationships have been resolved and they're maybe in a position of safety, so that they can start to rebuild their emotional capacity and their physical capacity to create that financial resilience.
Yeah. And I wonder if there is a higher connection with neurodivergent women who potentially have stories and beliefs around the way they handle money. Like you say, it's generational. We see it in cycles. We see it in, potentially our mothers and grandmothers. And we have stories that we're not capable enough to look after our own money, or we go into debt, or we don't understand accounting, and all these things that perhaps have just been embedded in us, and it's just so deeply rooted. And I do see this a lot with ADHD, with amazingly brilliant women who then turn around and say, well, I can't make money, or I don't know how to hold on to money.
Yeah.
Can we speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's super interesting, because what you're describing here for me is all about identity. Because we create an identity for ourselves around money. And the way that we create this sense of identity is through our language. So when we say things like, I'm bad with money, I'm not capable of building wealth, I can't hold on to money, essentially it's this unconscious pattern that is created, which very often can be an unconscious allegiance to poverty that could be something that has been passed down through the generations. And also what can happen, especially I find with ADHD, is that we can inadvertently become addicted to trauma. And what I mean by that is, when we say the word trauma, a lot of people think that it's big T work, and it's not. Everyone has experienced trauma at some point in their lives. And epigenetically, we know that trauma is carried down back through 3 generations. But what happens, particularly with ADHD, because the brain is wired to seek out dopamine hits, this kind of immediate reward system, is that when we become addicted to those trauma cycles, after we've experienced trauma, maybe from past relationships, our whole nervous system becomes so extremely sensitive to signs of danger in the moment, in today. And this then creates this kind of really uncomfortable impulse to keep looking for those threats, looking for similar partners or similar friendships. We might come out of one partnership, but we then might suddenly find ourselves in a narcissistic friendship or attracting a narcissistic client. And then we end up sabotaging those relationships And we end up kind of maintaining this real high level of hypervigilance that
Mm.
keeps us feeling safe, but actually it can become, quite fatal. So breaking this addiction to trauma is the one thing that is going to really help you to heal, and it's the one thing that most people don't do because their nervous systems feel that it's just too scary, because it's completely unfamiliar, it's too scary, it's easier for them to stay in that hypervigilant state, it's easier for them to give their power away to money by saying things like, I'm not good with money.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at managing money. I'm an overspender. It really is that depth of work, that nervous system regulation work, that is, I think, the key that unlocks your ability to be able to hold more wealth. Because when the nervous system feels safe, we're not in fight or flight response. We're not in fawning response where we're people pleasing or overgiving and not having boundaries. We're in a state of feeling safety. And when we feel safe, we make much better decisions, particularly around money.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with all of this. It's just so beautifully articulated what you just said. What I wanted to ask you is what brought you to this work yourself? Did you experience this through your family and your, with trauma? Because I always know that when we're so passionate about a conversation like this, subject, that there has been, like, how did you, is this always what you've done, or did you move from one career to another career?
Yeah, no, I mean, I used to be a financial advisor. I was a financial advisor for 18 years. And I had a terrible relationship with money during those years. And being a financial advisor, obviously, I knew all the practical things to do with money. And I held so much shame that I was giving advice on investing and tax advice and building wealth in the stock market and, all of these different wealth streams. And then I wasn't doing it for myself. And the key moment for me that just completely changed my whole life was when my second son was 5 weeks old and we almost lost him. He was rushed into hospital when he was 5 weeks old and he had bacterial meningitis. And it was when I was in hospital with him that I remember one particular day when the doctor came into the room and Thomas had to have some antibiotics. And I had Thomas in my arms, and this doctor was changing his cannula, and he was pushing this syringe into Thomas's sort of little device that they administer the medication into. And Thomas was screaming and screaming, and I was saying to the doctor, the cannula's not in the right place, it's coming out of his arm. And the doctor was like, no, we just need to get this medication in. And he was using all this jargon with me that I just didn't understand. And in that moment, the doctor finally listened and removed the cannula because it wasn't in the right place and was able to successfully administer the medication. And it was in that moment where I thought, how many people feel like this about money? How many people don't understand the jargon and the masculinity that sits around money? Being in financial services, I was the only woman in my whole team. I was sexually harassed. I experienced so many times when I deeply connected money to the sense of power, overriding power, and I also didn't understand it. And I wondered how many people felt like that about money. And so I literally handed in my notice. I went back to work. I resigned, and I actually trained as an image consultant. That was my first business because my relationship with money was overspending on clothes because I felt so much shame around my body that I would overspend on clothes every single month, and I would repeat this cycle every single month. And so I trained as an image consultant. It completely changed my life. And I then decided to really lean into the psychology that sat behind the decisions that we made about our sense of self, our self-worth, and money. And that's kind of how I then evolved back into the financial space, but away from the financial advice market and very much leaning into the therapeutic space and the psychology space around money.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing, your story. And as women, especially, I think feel that we've been disempowered over the years. We've really just, everything's been taken away from us. And I just love what you're doing, the resilience, the empowerment, the helping women step into this worthiness of knowing their worth and they deserve to make money and live an abundant life, doing what they love.
And when women have money, we do incredible things. I mean, like, just the statistics around this, women, when they invest in ethical investments on the stock market. They don't try and time the markets. They're in the markets for longer. They're investing in companies that are supportive, not some of the sin stocks like tobacco and pornography companies and arms manufacturing companies. They do good in the world, right? So the more women that can have money and hold money means that we get to live in a better world. We get to live our most enriched life. And, you can probably tell from my tone of voice right now, I feel so empowered to help everyone to feel like they deserve this, right? You deserve wealth in your life, not being a number in your bank account. You deserve this, and you deserve this for yourself and for every single future generation ahead of us.
So I'm just interrupting today's episode to let you know about a brand new live workshop that I've got coming up on the 24th of May at 1 p.m. And this workshop is all about reducing your ADHD overwhelm in family life and discovering and welcoming in more calm and regulation. Now, I want to let you know that I don't have all the answers, but it's something that I deal with on a daily basis. And I've discovered over the years of understanding my own ADHD and coupled with all my coaching and talking to my experts on the podcast, as well as all my hundreds of coaching clients, that there is a way of living without feeling in this sort of default state of feeling like you're drowning, that you're stressed all the time. And juggling family life alongside an ADHD brain can feel overwhelming at best and debilitating at worst. And life is happening at the moment at breakneck speed. We are all struggling to feel balanced, to like we're keeping up. And so I wanted to share with you 6 steps that I know have worked for me and 6 steps that I often talk about to many of my private coaching clients. So I wanted to share this in a group live workshop. So if this is something that you are dealing with right now and you would love some more support, some new ideas, different perspectives, I would love it if you could join me. All the details are on today's show notes, but also on my website, which is adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk. If you head to the show notes or my website, you'll find all the information, and it's in 1 hour. You'll learn some new ways of coping and feeling more resilient and looking at life differently and feeling like you don't have to be at the mercy of everything that's piling up on top of you, and that you do have control and choice over what you choose to bring into your family life. So I really look forward to seeing you there. It's the 24th of May, 1 o'clock, and all the details are on my website. Now back to today's episode. So how can we change this narrative if someone's listening right now and they are saying, yes, I'm the first generation in my family who is striving for wealth and to hold on to wealth, and to recognize, through my ADHD, I want to feel more, like you say, financially resilient. I want to prioritize my financial well-being. I want to ensure that I'm not being impulsive. I'm not overspending. I'm understanding my wealth and my money, and I'm not shutting things down and pretending my bank account doesn't exist. Where would you start? Like, it feels overwhelming to get to that place. Like, where would you start for someone? Like, what's the beginning of their journey?
So there's a few different ways to do this. And I know that you're an EFT practitioner as well. And so one of the things I love to do is to, first of all, try and identify a core money belief. And I like to do that in the body, because when the logical mind tries to take over with this conversation, then we often end up with very different core sentences. As an inherited family trauma practitioner as well, we often will look at the demographics right back through the lineage of the family history. So we actually look at a core belief sentence, which is actually gathered by just listening to your language, things that you're saying about money. And so you could simply take, for example, what is the worst fear that you have about money? And then what you do from that point is you then dive a little bit deeper into what is the worst thing about that? They might, I might, right? And you'll get statements like, I might be abandoned, or I might not be accepted, or I might not survive, or I might let my partner down. I might let my clients down. You'll get into some more depth around those core sentences. And in the inherited family trauma space, we actually look at who was abandoned, who wasn't accepted. And that, for me, is a really incredibly powerful place to start, because a lot of the shame and the guilt that we carry around money doesn't even belong to us. It literally has been handed down through the generations. And when you can do a somatic practice of releasing some of that shame and the energy that sits around that shame, it's the most liberating experience, because no longer are you attaching that sense of identity, that past identity, to yourself. And it enables you to unlock what I would call more of an expansive energy. So rather than feeling like we've been contracted, we are able to step into this place of expansion. Now, I'm a really big believer in, we can spend many hours, many investments working on healing the past. And we also, at the same time, get to work on creating an energy that sits around where we are right now in the present moment and where we are in the future. Now, a lot of people with ADHD in particular, or if for neurodivergence, can struggle with future work because, well, it's all about today. It's living in the moment. It's that impulse. So one of the practices that I like to experience is to use heart breathing. And I'll literally, and I do this every single day, sometimes several times a day. And I'll just drop down my eyes and I'll place my hands over my heart. And I'll connect into the heart's energy, which is the most powerful energy in your whole system. And I will just bring in a memory of a time when I felt love, appreciation, or gratitude. And I bring in that memory, and it could be a past memory, it could be a memory of a celebration, it could just be in that moment, in that very moment of being consciously aware of, I'm here today, this is who I am, and standing in that really powerful place. And I feel all of that emotion. I imagine it's radiating around my entire body. You can do a lot of immersive work with this exercise. And then I use that energy and I ask myself a question. And the question is, and you can be quite specific, what is required of me when it comes to my finances today? What is required of me? And what it enables you to do is to really draw on the energy of that present moment. And it also enables you to then start thinking about what energetically is something that is going to create movement. And for me, movement is really helpful in the context of money management, especially for ADHD, because the general traditional budgeting systems don't work. Even some of the apps and things that you can use to automate budgeting and savings still don't sometimes work. But when we come from a place of movement and expansion rather than masculine goal planning, things that are 10 years, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? It's really difficult for the brain to grapple around this. So when you connect into the body, you connect into today, and you are in a position where you've closed off anything that feels energetically contracting, or able to drop into the expansion work. You feel good, your nervous system feels regulated, and then you can come from a place of, right, what movement do I want to create around my finances today in this moment? And it just gets rid of all of the needs, the shoulding energy, the waiting energy that can often be associated with ADHD. And I just think that's such a unique and very different way of looking at finances and managing finances, not looking at numbers, not looking at spreadsheets. You don't need to do any of those things. You can outsource those to the bookkeepers and the accountants that have so much joy in doing those things, and then get to focus your work on, how do I want to feel? How can I expand this into the future? Still do some healing work, right? But sometimes we do too much healing work and we can get addicted to that loop, that cycle. So it's really bringing it into the energy of today.
Yeah, I absolutely love this, because what you're describing is, what we typically would see as money, success, wealth is like very masculine energy. And we're blending the more feminine energies. And it's not like man, woman, it's just using our body, using our, somatic work, nervous system, our heart space, all of that just feels so much softer, a much more gentle approach. And, in my logical brain, you're saying movement, I think kind of like going for a walk, but a run. But are you just saying, what can we do to, move the dial that feels good to us in our work, in our business, or leaning towards the career that we want? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, completely. Like the word. So if I think about traditional money management words that are used, other than the ones we've already shared, it may be things like, let's put a plan in place, or let's put, a routine in place. And that can feel quite daunting
And
for
restricting.
very restrictive, yet the budget, who wants
Yeah.
to restrict money? It feels very contracting. So I always look for, how do we make this more of an expansive experience? And for me, movement is, if you think about an elastic band, if you've got an elastic band in your hand, you're gently stretching that elastic band, you're creating movement, you're creating depth, you're creating expansion. And that in turn is going to create opportunities for your brain to go and seek new evidence. Because the brain's main job, as we know, is to keep us safe. And therefore, it will keep us in familiarity patterns. And that's why things can still feel scary. And we still continue to tell ourselves, I'm bad with money. I can't attract clients. I can't hold on to money. Because we haven't given our brain the opportunity to expand into those stories that are counteracting the stories that we have either created from our own experiences, stories that have been created by society, and stories that have been created from ancestral work. Now, the society one, just to touch on that really briefly, society has a huge impact. And even if you just think about, if you were to simply Google challenges for people with ADHD with money, the same stuff comes up. You're impulsive, you're spontaneous, you're an overspender. We have to start to shift the language that we are using for neurotypical and neurodiverse people, right? Because otherwise the brain's going to go, oh, okay, let's just look for more of this evidence. And it keeps us stuck in those cycles and those patterns. So I'm a really big believer in that language, and the language that you use with yourself is one of the most powerful shifts that you can make today to start to expand your brain's capacity to truly access this new identity that you can create for yourself. And it's putting those blinkers on to what everybody else is saying, and thinking about, how do you get to expand your own identity with your relationship with money. Now, most people think that they are money, right? Because they'll say things like, I am bad with money. So those words, I am bad with money, is literally like they've just gone, oh, that's me. I'm debt. I'm terrible. I'm always in overdrafts and overspending on credit cards. They think that debt is them, that it's part of who they are and their identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about that separation. Like you can even imagine the whole energetic separation around this identity piece that then creates this real power where you no longer see yourself as money. Money, it's a piece of paper. It's something that the bank can print more of. It's called quantitative easing. They can just print more of it. And it's funny how we don't give any stories to oxygen. We don't look at oxygen and say, oh, there's only enough oxygen for these people in business that are doing really well and making loads of money and attracting loads of clients, but there's not enough oxygen for me over here. But we don't give those stories to oxygen. So why do we give these stories to money?
Yeah, because we hear about money being energy. And if someone's listening to this for the first time, and all this language and everything is very, very new to them, it can feel like, oh my God, what are they talking about? What do you mean I am money, and money is energy, and I need to pay the bills. I need to pay my kids, netball or whatever it is. I need to get trainers and food and all of that. I struggle with money, and they have these words. What analogy maybe can you offer when we talk about money being energy and money's being printed? And is there an exercise, a practical exercise that someone could lean into to start welcoming in more abundance into their life? And when I say abundance, it doesn't have to be money. We can see abundance come in one way, and then it can translate into something really fun with money. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love that question so much. There's actually there's a few exercises in my book, where I talk about this place of gratitude and appreciation. I'm now just thinking, which one do I share? One of the exercises that I love to do personally is to think about gratitude and abundance being a resource. It's something that is all around us. It's a resource of some description. So you can almost completely forget about money being the resource and just think about, what are you able to allow yourself to receive? Right? So if we're talking about abundance, we're talking about that feeling of gratitude, that feeling of appreciation, that feeling of worthiness of having abundance in the first place. So drop all the connections with money and just ask yourself, where am I opening myself up for opportunities to receive? And the easiest one is, how do you respond to compliments? So if somebody is walking past you, you're on the school run, maybe you've got the dog on a lead, you've not had time to do your hair and you've got your jogging bottoms on, and someone walks past you and says, "Oh, your hair looks great today." How are you responding to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Right?
I typically, I know that was a rhetorical question, but the old me would have gone, oh my God, it needs washing, it's vile, I need to go to the hairdressers straight away, da da da. And I'm starting to learn, and it's been slow, of just going, thank you so much. And that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what you're demonstrating there is your ability to just fully receive, right? As opposed to going into those stories of, oh, like, thanks. Like, actually, my hair needs cutting. It's really dry on the ends and I haven't done anything with it this morning. Like, we go into those stories because our nervous system doesn't feel in a place of safety to receive. Now, some of you listening to this might think, well, that's only relevant for people who don't have very much money. This happens at every level. I worked with an entrepreneur 2 years ago. She was making almost 8 figures in her business, and she was spending almost 8 figures in her business. So her ability to receive was actually quite abundant, and her ability to hold was closed. It was contracted. So what was happening is she was receiving, no problems at all there, but then she was going into contraction energy and she was spending, spend. She wasn't able to hold that wealth. Now, what was interesting is that when we actually did some work together on this, there was an experience where she got married while we were working together. And it was the most joyful ceremony that she'd ever experienced. So much joy. The event was incredibly special, very spiritual. And the evening of her wedding, she got into bed and she broke her arm. She slipped on the floor, broke her arm, ended up in hospital that evening. And it was a real moment of her ability to hold
Mm.
love and joy.
I've just got goosebumps. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that there's always times in our life that we can look back, if you're resonating with this, where maybe you can receive, but then you're finding you're not holding wealth, you're not holding money. And often it is because of our inability to hold love and our inability to hold joy. And this very often comes right back to sense of safety, potentially some inherited family trauma work where there's maybe been a break in the bond with our mother, for example. And if we have a break in the bond with the mother, then often we're not able to hold love because we haven't experienced the ability to hold love. Now, that can even be present, even if you've got a great relationship with your mother and you've had a great relationship with your mother, it can come at moments during labor, maybe where you've been taken away from your mother for a few hours, or there was a very early experience where there was a detachment in that bond between the mother and the daughter. or in previous generations. So if there was any energetic or stressful situation that your mum experienced when she was carrying you, that can also show up in a break in the bonds between the mother and the daughter. So it's a really interesting piece of work. And I think, in answer to your question, the best place to start is just to ask yourself that question: where am I being, or where am I feeling open to receive? And where am I feeling open or able to hold? And that might be hold a moment of joy. Like, test it with yourself. How long can you feel love and feel joy in your body? Even if it's 5 minutes, see if you can stretch it to 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 2 hours, because that ability to create that emotional connection in your body will have a significant impact in your ability to make money and hold more money.
Yeah. And where does guilt come into it? If, you say hold money and people are making the money and then they've got family stories and family, trauma and all of that, where wealth didn't come easy. And then you're making money and you can't enjoy it because you've got guilt around that.
Yeah, I mean, guilt is a really interesting emotion in itself, because if you think about guilt and shame, guilt is actually not as a lower vibrational energy as shame. Guilt is often to do with something that somebody has done, an action that you have taken, a mistake that you have made. Whereas shame is when we take that experience and we make it about ourselves. So actually, guilt is an easier emotion to clear than shame is. If you think about emotions being on an emotional spectrum, with joy and love being right at the top of the energetic spectrum, right at the bottom is shame. Guilt is one of those ones that can be shifted, but it can shift either way. It can shift into shame, or it can shift up into responsibility. And often with guilt, it comes from a perception that we have done something wrong. So the best way to heal guilt is to identify what the experience is, and then to do some self-forgiveness work. And the self-forgiveness work will then take you out of that guilt into self-responsibility, so that you no longer feel guilty for something that you have done, and you are able to move into a place of love of yourself and feel that you are capable of receiving and be capable of taking responsibility.
Yeah. And what we've got to remember, even though this work feels really hard, and it can be, and it's, it's you've got to go in there, and you do have to sort of commit to it on a daily basis, every single day, those little tiny shifts. But what it can do is it heals the past. It heals, maybe we don't even know energetically kind of like what's going on, in our family lineage. But also we're modeling to the future generations, whether you've got kids or we're preparing ourselves if we want kids. And we are hopefully creating more of an expansive space for them to not pick up the family traumas and beliefs that we've held on to. So doing this work is not only fantastic for us, but it can be very helpful for the next generation, which, we talk about all the time on this podcast, is the awareness that we have, whether, it's ADHD, whether it's our health or well-being or spirituality, all these different things, that if we do this work, we're laying amazing foundations. So even if we think we're not worthy of it and we're not deserving of it to begin with, hopefully, as we do the work, we can see that things start shifting. And I know from an energetic perspective, when we do this work, we see little things happen, ripple out in our family, conversations, the way relationships change, the way certain things shift in our business, which is, fantastic. The coincidences, the serendipities, all the different things that kind of come our way, these amazing opportunities and possibilities. And we open our eyes to new ways of thinking and new perspectives that are so profound, but also so subtle that we kind of think, oh, how did that happen? And I love this work, and I'm just delighted to be able to have this conversation with you. And I just want to be able to touch on, I'd say moving forwards now, like how do you help people? I know you mentioned you've got a book. If someone's listening to you right now and you're speaking their language, or you're piquing something in them, or there's a curiosity, how can they begin working with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So my book is called It's Not About the Money, and we actually give that book away for free on our website, so you can have access to that book. I have a podcast also called It's Not About the Money. So if you are a podcast listener, then that would be a great place to come and hang out with us.
Okay. And work-wise, do you do one-to-one coaching, or is it sort of containers? Like what kind of offers have you got
Yeah.
there?
So because our mission is about empowering 1 million women to be financially resilient, we have a number of different ways that we can support women. So we have group programs in the online space. We also do one-to-one consultations and coaching sessions with clients. We also hold some really deep, immersive retreat experiences over here in Jersey, which is where I live. And we have also clients who have trained in our own modalities as well, that are supporting our clients in our businesses. So we have lots of different ways that we try and make it as accessible for people depending on where they are at in their financial journey. So yes, lots of different ways that we can support people.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope that whoever's listening to today's podcast can use your inspiring words and start kind of thinking, what if, lean into that curiosity of how can I do what I love, but also bring the feminine energy and the authenticness of what, you want to bring to the world. So thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did and it resonated with you, I would absolutely love it if you could share on your platforms or maybe leave a review and a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please do check out my website, adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk, for lots of free resources and paid for workshops. I'm uploading new things all the time and I would absolutely love to see you there. Take care and see you for the next episode.